What if I told you that the most dangerous revolutions in history were not fought with guns, tanks, or armies, but with ideas about money, land, and who really controls wealth? And that more than 100 years ago, one man tried to completely redesign China's economic system long before communism, long before modern capitalism debates, and long before globalization reshaped the world. A man with no army, no personal wealth, and no permanent power, yet whose ideas were so threatening that emperors feared him. Warlords sidelined him, and later regimes selectively used his vision while ignoring its core warning. Because this is not just the story of Sun Yat-sen. This is the story of what happens when economic truth collides with political reality, and why nations keep repeating the same mistakes under different names. At the end of the 19th century, China was not simply poor. It was structurally trapped in an economic cage built over centuries, where land ownership was concentrated in the hands of elites. Farmers worked endlessly without upward mobility. Merchants were restricted by feudal regulations. Innovation was discouraged, and foreign powers exploited every weakness through trade imbalances, forced treaties, and financial manipulation. While Western nations were building railroads, factories, banks, and global trade networks, China was bleeding silver, drowning in opium addiction, and losing control over its own economy, piece by piece. And ordinary people felt the consequences first. As hunger spread, debt increased, and hope disappeared. And it was inside this collapsing system that Sun Yat-sen was born in 1866 into a poor farming family where survival depended on land, weather, and the mercy of landlords. Yet unlike most children of his background, Sun's life took an unexpected turn when he left China and traveled to Hawaii and later Hong Kong, where he encountered modern education, Western medicine, constitutional governments, and functioning capitalist economies. And while others saw technology and comfort, Sun saw something deeper. He saw systems that rewarded productivity, protected property, invested in infrastructure, and allowed people to rise regardless of birth. And this realization disturbed him deeply because it exposed the real reason China was falling behind. Not because Chinese people lacked intelligence or discipline, but because their economic system was designed to preserve power instead of creating opportunity. And while many revolutionaries of his time focused solely on removing the emperor, Sun asked a far more dangerous question that few dared to consider. What kind of economic system would replace the old one after the throne was gone? Because he understood something history repeatedly proves. Political freedom without economic reform is an illusion. And from this insight, Sun developed what would become known as the three principles of the people. Nationalism, to reclaim China from foreign control. Democracy, to give people political voice, and people's livelihood to ensure economic justice. And it was that third principle that terrified elites the most because it challenged land speculation, monopolies, foreign exploitation, and extreme inequality, calling instead for land reform, regulated capitalism, state involvement in key industries, infrastructure investment, and a balanced economic system designed to serve society rather than extract from it. Sun believed unchecked capitalism created inequality as destructive as feudalism. Yet he also believed rigid socialism crushed innovation and personal freedom. So he imagined a mixed economy decades before it became common in the modern world. A system where private enterprise could thrive, but strategic sectors like railroads, utilities, and land value would serve the public good. Ideas that today sound familiar in debates about infrastructure spending, regulation, and inequality, but at the time were considered radical and dangerous. Yet ideas alone do not create revolutions. Power does. And in 1911, when the Qing dynasty finally collapsed under internal decay and public unrest, China declared itself a republic, and Sun Yat-sen was named provisional president. A moment that should have changed history forever, but instead revealed the brutal truth of politics, because within weeks, military leaders, warlords, and opportunists maneuvered behind the scenes, prioritizing control over reform and force over vision, pushing Sun aside and turning him into a symbol rather than a ruler, leaving him as a revolutionary without authority and a reformer without the tools to implement his economic blueprint. And instead of governing, Sun spent the rest of his life traveling, fundraising, writing, and warning that China would collapse again if inequality, corruption, and foreign financial dependence were not addressed. Warnings that echoed across Asia and the West, yet were largely ignored by those who benefited from the existing system. And when Sun Yat-sen died in 1925, he died poor, exhausted, and without seeing his vision realized. A tragic ending for a man who tried to redesign an entire nation's future. Yet history delivered a strange and ironic afterlife to his ideas as both. Communist China and capitalist Taiwan later claimed Sun as their founding father, selectively borrowing pieces of his philosophy while never fully implementing his balanced economic vision, turning him into a monument rather than a roadmap. And this selective memory is where Sun's story becomes deeply relevant to the modern United States, because the same questions he asked over a century ago dominate American debate today. Questions about wealth concentration, corporate power, infrastructure decay, financial dependency, and whether economic systems serve people or trap them. Sun predicted that nations obsessed with growth, but blind to distribution, eventually faced instability. That infrastructure determines long-term power more than short-term profits. That foreign debt and financial dependence are silent forms of control. And that inequality is not just immoral, but dangerous. Lessons that feel uncomfortably familiar in a world where productivity rises while opportunity shrinks and trust in institutions erodes. And the most important lesson Sun Yat-sen leaves behind is not that he failed, but why he failed. Because systems resist change more fiercely than rulers do. Because removing leaders is easy while redesigning economies threatens everyone who benefits from the old order. And that is why revolutions often replace faces without changing structures, leading to cycles of collapse under new names. And this leads to the haunting question that should concern every modern society. If Sun Yat-sen were alive today, would he see progress or repetition? Would he believe humanity learned from history or simply upgraded its technology while repeating the same economic mistakes? Because history does not repeat itself loudly. It whispers until inequality becomes unbearable, debt becomes invisible chains, and collapse feels sudden only to those who ignored the warning signs. And if this story made you rethink money, power, and the hidden systems shaping nations, then share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you believe economic systems matter more than political speeches, and subscribe to Finance TED Official, because the next economic collapse never looks like the last one. And by the time it becomes obvious, it's already too late.